A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
My Weird Prompts is a community-driven initiative exploring how AI can fuel curiosity and uncover the fascinating ways our world works. GPU compute for this podcast is generously provided by Modal. Learn more at modal.com.
Welcome back to episode 1348 of My Weird Prompts. I am Korn, and as always, I am joined by my co-host and the man who never meets a data point he does not like, Herman Poppleberry.
It is good to be here, Korn. I have to say, I am particularly excited about today's topic. It is one of our AI Asks episodes, which means the prompt did not come from our usual listener mailbag or our own frantic late-night research sessions.
That is right. Our friend Claude Opus reached out to us with this one. Claude Opus has been a buddy of the show for a long while now, and he really has a knack for finding these weird intersections of physics and human psychology. He suggested we look into the world of infrasound and the legendary brown note.
Claude Opus really hit the nail on the head with this one. It is a topic that sounds like pure urban legend, something you would hear on a playground or in a dark corner of the internet. But when you peel back the layers, there is some very heavy-duty science and even some military history involved. Claude actually phrased it as the sonic weapon you have never heard of, which is a perfect double entendre because, well, you literally cannot hear it.
I remember hearing about the brown note years ago, probably back in high school. The idea that there is a specific sound frequency that can make a human being lose control of their bowels instantly. It sounds like a prank, but as we started digging into what Claude Opus sent over, I realized we are talking about a much broader and more unsettling phenomenon. It is not just about a messy accident. It is about how the very air around us can be vibrating in ways that bypass our ears and hack our brains.
We're talking about infrasound. These are sound waves with a frequency below 20 Hz. For context, the average human ear can hear sounds from about 20 Hz up to 20,000 Hz. So, infrasound is literally below the limit of our conscious hearing. You cannot hear it, but your body can absolutely feel it. It is the deep, deep bass of the universe.
That is what is so eerie about it. It is an invisible force. We actually touched on some interesting acoustic concepts back in episode 1330 when we talked about the Beethoven effect and bone conduction. But in that case, the sound is still within a range we recognize as music or noise. Infrasound is more like a physical pressure or a vibration that bypasses the ears and goes straight to the organs. It is like the difference between someone shouting at you and someone pushing on your chest.
It really is a sensory trespass, which reminds me of our discussion in episode 737 about auditory trespass in urban environments. But while a loud jackhammer is an obvious annoyance, infrasound is a stealthy intruder. It can cause anxiety, sorrow, and even physical illness without the person ever knowing they are being blasted with sound. It is the ultimate ghost in the room.
So, Herman, let us set the stage here. If we cannot hear these sounds, how do we know they are there, and how do we even begin to measure their impact on us? I mean, if I am standing in a room and I feel a sense of dread, how do I distinguish between a bad vibe and a physical sound wave?
Well, we measure them the same way we measure audible sound, using decibels and hertz. But we use specialized microphones called microbarometers that are designed to pick up these very slow, long wavelength pressure changes in the air. To give you an idea of the scale, a 20 Hz wave is about 17 meters long. That is roughly the length of a large semi-truck. These waves can travel for hundreds of miles because they are not easily absorbed by the atmosphere or obstacles. High-frequency sounds, like a bird chirping, get scattered and absorbed quickly. But infrasound? It just keeps rolling.
Hundreds of miles? That is incredible. So, if a massive storm or an earthquake happens, it is sending out these low-frequency ripples that could be reaching us, even if we are far away from the epicenter. It is like the Earth is groaning at a frequency we just cannot tune into.
In fact, scientists use infrasound arrays to monitor for nuclear tests across the globe. When a nuclear device detonates, it creates a massive pulse of infrasound that circles the planet multiple times. But on a more local level, infrasound is all around us. It is generated by wind turbines, heavy machinery, diesel engines, and even the wind blowing over large buildings or through mountain passes. It is the background hum of the industrial and natural world.
And this brings us to the psychological side of things. There is a famous story about a laboratory in England back in the late 1990s. I believe the researcher's name was Vic Tandy. He was working in a lab that everyone thought was haunted, right?
That is one of the most famous cases in the history of infrasound research. Vic Tandy was a computer engineer working for a medical equipment company in Coventry. The staff in this particular lab reported feeling a sense of dread, seeing gray apparitions out of the corner of their eyes, and feeling like they were being watched. One night, Tandy was working alone and he saw a gray figure emerge in his peripheral vision. When he turned to face it, it vanished.
Now, a lot of people would have just called a priest or quit their job. But Tandy was a scientist. He decided to look for a physical explanation. He did not believe in ghosts, so he started looking for the ghost in the machine.
He did. The breakthrough happened when he brought a fencing foil to work the next day. He was a competitive fencer, and he wanted to do some repairs on it. When he clamped the blade in a vise, he noticed the tip of the foil was vibrating wildly even though the room was seemingly still. He realized that there was a standing wave in the room. He eventually traced the source to a newly installed extractor fan in the ventilation system. The fan was vibrating at exactly 18.9 hertz.
And 18.9 hertz is right at that threshold we were talking about. Why was that specific number so important? It seems so precise.
It turns out that 18.9 hertz is very close to the resonant frequency of the human eyeball. This is where we get into what I like to call the corn probes, where we look at how these waves interact with our biology. When your eyes are subjected to that frequency, they start to vibrate microscopically. This causes a blurring of vision, especially in the periphery, which can lead the brain to interpret those blurs as moving figures or ghosts. Combine that with the fact that infrasound at that frequency often triggers a fight or flight response, and you have a perfect recipe for a haunting. Your body feels danger, and your eyes see shadows.
It is fascinating because it suggests that so many ghost stories throughout history might just be a matter of bad ventilation or wind hitting a specific architectural feature. It makes me wonder about old cathedrals or castles. They are drafty, they have huge open spaces, and the wind must create all sorts of infrasonic resonance in those stone hallways. You are not seeing the lady in white. You are just seeing your own vitreous humor shaking in its socket.
You are spot on. There have actually been studies done in supposedly haunted locations, like the South Bridge Vaults in Edinburgh, where researchers found significant levels of infrasound. People in those spaces reported the same feelings of unease and cold spots. It is a physical reaction that our brains try to rationalize by creating a narrative of ghosts or spirits. Our brains are meaning-making machines, corn. If the body feels weird, the brain finds a reason, even if it has to invent a phantom.
It is almost like a biological alarm system. Perhaps in our evolutionary past, infrasound was a signal of danger, like a coming earthquake, a volcanic eruption, or a large predator. If you can feel the ground shaking before you see the threat, you have a better chance of survival.
That is the leading theory. Many large predators, like tigers and lions, actually produce infrasound when they roar. It is a way to paralyze their prey with a sense of overwhelming dread before they even strike. It is a physiological hack. A tiger's roar has a component at 18 hertz that can literally cause a human to freeze. And speaking of the animal kingdom, Claude Opus pointed out that elephants are the masters of this.
Right, I have read about this. They use infrasound to communicate over massive distances, sometimes up to 10 kilometers or about 6 miles. It is like they have their own long-distance radio.
They do. They have these massive vocal cords and a specialized structure in their foreheads that can produce these deep rumbles. Because infrasound travels so well through the ground and the air without losing energy, an elephant cow can signal to a bull miles away. They can even sense these vibrations through their feet. They have specialized receptors called Pacinian corpuscles in their foot pads that pick up the subsonic thumping of other elephants. It is a form of seismic communication.
It is like they have their own private internet running under the savanna. It makes you realize how limited our human senses really are. We think we are getting the whole picture, but we are missing this entire layer of communication and environmental data. We are living in a silent world compared to what an elephant or a whale experiences.
It definitely humbles you. But let us get to the part everyone is curious about, the dark side of this technology. If infrasound can make you see ghosts or feel dread, can it be used as a weapon? And specifically, what about the brown note? This is the part where the playground rumors meet the laboratory.
This is where the science gets a little more controversial. The idea of the brown note is that a frequency between 5 and 9 hertz, played at a high enough volume, will cause the human digestive system to resonate so violently that you lose control of your bowels. It is the ultimate non-lethal deterrent, I suppose.
It is a popular trope in fiction. There was a famous episode of South Park about it back in the year 2000, and it has been discussed in military circles for decades. During the Cold War, there were rumors that both the United States and the Soviet Union were experimenting with acoustic weapons that could incapacitate entire crowds without killing them. The goal was a weapon that could make an army literally stop in their tracks.
Well, we know for a fact that the military uses non-lethal acoustic devices today. We see the Long-Range Acoustic Device, or LRAD, being used on ships to deter pirates or by police for crowd control. But those are usually high-frequency, piercing sounds that are very much audible. They are like a sonic punch to the ear.
Right, the LRAD is more like a sonic flashlight that focuses a beam of painful noise. But infrasonic weapons are a different beast. The French scientist Vladimir Gavreau is often cited as the father of infrasonic weaponry research. In the 1960s, he was working at a research institute in Marseille and noticed that his team was getting chronically ill. They were experiencing nausea and internal pain.
Was it another ventilation fan?
Almost. It was a large industrial ventilator in a neighboring plant. Gavreau became obsessed with the potential of these low frequencies. He built a giant whistle, essentially a massive organ pipe several meters long, to test the effects. Legend has it that when they turned it on, it nearly shook the building apart and made the researchers feel like their internal organs were being mashed. Gavreau even claimed he could kill a man with sound waves, though he never actually demonstrated it.
That sounds incredibly dangerous. If you were vibrating the heart or the lungs at their resonant frequency, you could literally cause them to fail. It is like the opera singer breaking a glass, but the glass is your ribcage.
That is the theory behind the sonic bullet. Every organ in the human body has a resonant frequency. For the chest cavity, it is generally thought to be around 7 hertz. If you hit that frequency with enough power, you can cause extreme difficulty breathing and intense chest pain. However, when it comes to the brown note specifically, the evidence is much thinner. There is no magic frequency that acts as a remote control for your colon.
I remember the show Mythbusters actually tried to test this. They brought in a massive array of subwoofers and a test subject, and they blasted him with various low frequencies at high decibels. They really went for it.
They did, and the results were effectively negative. While the test subject felt very uncomfortable and his chest was vibrating, he did not have the catastrophic gastrointestinal failure that the legend suggests. The reality is that to achieve that kind of physical effect, you would need an incredible amount of power, something in the range of 150 to 160 decibels.
To put that in perspective for the listeners, a jet engine at takeoff is around 140 decibels. So we are talking about a sound that is physically loud enough to burst your eardrums and potentially cause permanent hearing damage, even if you cannot hear the frequency itself. At that point, the frequency matters less than the sheer force of the air hitting you.
At those levels, the sheer pressure of the sound waves is doing the damage. It is less about a magical frequency and more about raw acoustic power. So, while the brown note as a specific, low-power frequency trigger is almost certainly a myth, the idea of using low-frequency sound as a physiological irritant is very real. It is about making the environment so hostile that the human body simply cannot function normally.
It reminds me of how horror movies use this. We know that directors like Gaspar Noé and the sound designers for films like Paranormal Activity use infrasound in the theater. They are literally piping in our knees.
That is a brilliant application of the science. In the movie Irreversible, they used a 27 Hz tone during the first 30 minutes of the film. It is just above the infrasound limit, but it is low enough that most people feel it as a physical weight in the room. It creates a sense of nausea and disorientation. It prepares the audience psychologically for the disturbing imagery on screen. It is a way to bypass the critical mind and go straight to the nervous system.
It is a form of manipulation that the audience is not even aware of. You think you are just watching a scary movie, but the theater itself is physically attacking your nervous system. It is a very effective tool for a filmmaker, though it does raise some interesting questions about consent in entertainment. Should a movie be allowed to physically alter your heart rate without your knowledge?
It really does. If you are prone to vertigo or have a heart condition, that kind of sonic manipulation could potentially trigger a genuine medical issue. It is a hidden variable in our modern environment. We are constantly being influenced by things we cannot see or hear.
I want to go back to the military aspect for a moment. Even if the brown note is a myth, there is still active research into infrasound for defense. Why is that? What is the strategic value of a sound you cannot hear?
The value lies in its ability to penetrate structures. High-frequency sounds are easily blocked by walls, body armor, or even heavy clothing. Infrasound, because of those long wavelengths we mentioned earlier, passes right through concrete and steel. If you wanted to flush people out of a bunker or a building without destroying the structure, an infrasonic generator would be the way to do it. You create a zone of unbearable dread.
It is a psychological operations tool. You could make an entire neighborhood feel an overwhelming sense of doom and anxiety without them ever knowing why. They would just feel like they need to leave. It is a very pro-American stance to say we need to understand these technologies to defend against them. But it is also a bit terrifying to think about how they could be misused. It is the ultimate invisible weapon.
It really is. There have been reports, though often unconfirmed, of diplomatic personnel in various countries experiencing what has been called Havana syndrome. While the consensus as of today in March of 2026 has shifted toward microwave or radio frequency energy as the likely culprit, early theories heavily featured infrasound or ultrasound as the cause of the headaches, nausea, and memory loss reported by the victims. The fact that it was even considered shows how plausible the science is.
It shows how little we still understand about the long-term effects of low-frequency exposure. We live in a world that is noisier than ever. Even if we are not being targeted by a sonic weapon, we are surrounded by the hum of the modern world. It is like we are swimming in a sea of vibrations we were never meant to handle.
That is the concept of auditory trespass again. We talked about this in episode 737. We are constantly bathed in the low-frequency noise of air conditioners, traffic, and industrial machinery. Some studies suggest that chronic exposure to low-level infrasound can lead to sleep disturbances, increased stress hormones, and a general decline in well-being. It is a slow-motion physiological tax on our health.
It makes me think about the urban-rural divide. People often say they sleep better in the country because it is quiet, but maybe it is not just the lack of audible noise. Maybe it is the lack of that deep subsonic vibration that is constant in a city like New York or Chicago. In the city, the ground itself is vibrating from the subways and the heavy trucks.
There is a lot of weight to that theory. In a natural environment, the infrasound you encounter is usually tied to natural events like wind or water. In the city, it is a constant mechanical pulse. Our bodies evolved to respond to those frequencies as a warning sign, but now the warning sign never turns off. We are in a state of perpetual low-grade alarm.
So, Herman, based on your research, where does the science go from here? Are we going to see more applications of infrasound in our daily lives, or are we going to see more regulations to protect us from it?
I think we are going to see it used more in medical diagnostics. Because infrasound can penetrate deep into the body, there is research into using it for imaging or even for breaking up internal blockages without surgery. It is similar to how we use ultrasound, but with different properties. On the consumer side, I think we will see more focus on noise cancellation that targets these lower frequencies. Most of our current noise-canceling headphones are great for blocking out the hum of a plane engine, but they struggle with the very lowest infrasonic frequencies.
I would love to see a pair of headphones that could actually neutralize that feeling of dread in a crowded space. That would be a game changer for people with sensory sensitivities. We talked about that in episode 949, the challenge of navigating a world that is just too loud and too fast. Imagine a personal infrasound shield.
It would be a huge step forward for mental health and environmental control. But we also have to be aware of the potential for misuse. As our friend Claude Opus pointed out, the line between a tool and a weapon is often just a matter of who is holding the remote. If you can use sound to heal, you can also use it to harm.
That is a very Claude Opus way of looking at it. He always finds that philosophical edge. I am really glad he brought this topic to us. It is one of those things that changes the way you look at the room you're sitting in. You start wondering if that slight feeling of unease you have is just stress, or if your refrigerator is vibrating at 18.9 Hz.
It definitely makes you more aware of your surroundings. I spent the morning checking the ventilation in my office just in case. I did not see any gray figures, but you can never be too careful. I even checked the resonant frequency of my coffee mug.
Well, if you start seeing ghosts, Herman, we will know who to call. Probably a technician rather than a ghost hunter. We need more microbarometers and fewer Ouija boards.
A good acoustic engineer is worth their weight in gold. They are the true exorcists of the 21st century.
So, looking at the big picture, the brown note is likely a myth, but the power of infrasound is very real. It can communicate across continents, it can make us see things that are not there, and it can be used to subtly manipulate our emotions. It is a hidden spectrum that shapes our reality in ways we are only beginning to understand.
That sums it up perfectly. It is a reminder that we are physical beings in a physical world, and we are sensitive to forces we cannot even perceive. The invisible spectrum is just as important as the one we can see and hear. We are tuned to a very narrow band of reality, but the rest of the symphony is still playing.
I think that is a great place to wrap up the deep dive. It is a fascinating look at the hidden world around us. Herman, any final thoughts on the brown note before we move to the synthesis?
Just that I am glad we could clear up the myth. Science is about finding the truth, even if the truth is less theatrical than the urban legend. But the reality of infrasound is actually far more interesting than a simple gastrointestinal prank. The idea that elephants are talking through the earth is much more profound than a sound that makes you go to the bathroom.
I agree. The fact that elephants are essentially talking to each other through the ground is much cooler than any brown note story. It shows the elegance of nature versus the crudeness of our urban legends.
It really is. Nature usually has the best technology. We are just trying to catch up.
All right, let us take a moment to pull this all together. What are the key takeaways for the listeners?
First, infrasound is real and it affects us, whether we know it or not. If you feel unexplained anxiety or see things out of the corner of your eye in a specific room, check for sources of low-frequency vibration before you call a psychic. Second, the brown note is an exaggeration of the very real phenomenon of organ resonance. You can be hurt by sound, but it takes a lot more than just a specific frequency. And third, we are just beginning to understand how much our environment influences our internal state through these invisible channels.
It makes me think about the importance of being mindful of our sensory environments. We spend so much time worrying about what we see on our screens, but maybe we should spend a little more time thinking about the vibrations we are soaking in. Maybe we need to start thinking about acoustic hygiene.
Environmental health is about more than just clean air and water. It is about a clean acoustic environment too. We need to respect the silence, and we need to understand the noise we cannot hear.
If you enjoyed this dive into the weird world of sound, I highly recommend you check out some of our past episodes. We mentioned episode 1330 on bone conduction and episode 737 on auditory trespass. We also have episode 949, which goes into sensory sensitivity in much more detail. You can find all of those and the rest of our archive at myweirdprompts.com.
And if you have a topic you want us to explore, or if you have had a weird experience with infrasound yourself, we want to hear from you. Maybe you have been to a haunted location and felt that specific vibration, or maybe you work in an industry where these frequencies are a daily reality. We want to know if you have felt the ghost in the machine.
You can join our community on Telegram or find us on Spotify to leave a comment. We are always looking for new prompts, whether they come from our listeners or from our AI friends like Claude Opus.
This has been a great episode, Corn. I think I will be listening to some very high-frequency music for a while just to balance things out. Maybe some violins.
Sounds like a plan, Herman. Just keep it below the level of permanent hearing damage. We do not want to trade one problem for another.
I will do my best.
All right, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to episode 1348. This has been My Weird Prompts. I am Corn.
And I am Herman Poppleberry. We will see you next time.
Stay curious, and watch out for those 18.9 Hertz fans. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes